So thank you to the very large number of people who have helped me do the work I do here at UNM. So let me bring up some slides to show you. Today, I'm going to talk to you about some work I've been doing over the last 6 or 7 years here at University of New Mexico, building new tools for forensic research to serve communities. And I'm just going to say, we're starting at, before 9:30 in the morning, and I realized as I was putting this talk together, there's some heavy subjects in here. And we are going to be discussing deceased persons, and there are a few, not tons, of images of virtual images of human remains. And so if these are things that you are sensitive to, especially before 10 a.m., please be aware and feel free to check out temporarily. I have no problem with that. And I will try to keep the mood as light as possible. So the story I'm going to tell you about today is going to follow this kind of a framework. First, I'm going to give you an introduction to forensic science, stuff many of us have heard about, seen on TV, maybe on Bones or CSI or something. But I'll give you a short introduction to what it really is. These include, as I mentioned, some hard topics, but here I'll be talking about some positive outcomes. And then I'm going to describe to you NMDID, or NIMDID, as some people say, the New Mexico Decedent Image Database, which is a new tool for forensic research here at UNM, but used worldwide. And then I'm going to give you one application of NMDID, and then close with some appreciation for those who make this work possible. So that's the basic outline for this morning. So first, forensic science is just science applied to the law. The word forensic means applied to the law. Now, the kind of science that people do for forensics are often really meticulous and detailed, and so it's come to have kind of a wider meaning in the world. So, some people might say, well, we did a forensic analysis of a mummy, or I've even heard people say we did a forensic analysis of a dinosaur. So unless somebody stole or murdered that dinosaur, that is not a forensic analysis. And even that mummy, that's not a forensic analysis either. It's meticulous, it's careful, it may be bioarchaeological or anthropological, but it's not forensic unless the law is involved. So forensic research can actually be any field of scientific research that's applied to forensic questions. Most commonly, we think about medicine. So that's what we do here at the Office of the Medical Investigator, but also there's forensic physics. This is like ballistics, if we're studying gunshot patterns. Medical physics is involving a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today, CT scans and other kinds of imaging. Also fire patterning. Cybersecurity can be forensics. There's forensic accounting that has been really important in some of the O.J. Simpson cases. Forensic psychology, even forensic wildlife studies, looking at poachers and other kinds of issues, bringing illegal animals into the country. And I'll be focusing on forensic anthropology as one of the many fields of forensic research that is required to conduct research into crime and other aspects. So this counts as forensic science, and it's just that simple word evidence there that makes this, particular image, a generic image from the internet, be forensic. So a lot of the forensic research that's done at UNM is done at the Office of the Medical Investigator, which is not primarily a research component. This is a clinical component of the university, but we also do research. So the OMI investigates any death that occurs in the state of New Mexico that is sudden or violent or untimely or unexpected, or where a person is found dead and the cause of death is unknown. Now, which deaths are investigators by medical examiners or coroners varies from state to state and sometimes even county to county. But this is the rule that we have here in New Mexico. It's very full group of people that gets investigated. That doesn't mean everybody who meets that qualifications comes to the office, but each one is investigated. In 2019, the OMI investigated nearly 8,000 deaths. And some of the things that make the OMI special and different and really unique in the nation is that it is statewide. There's one office for the whole state. It's centralized. That means that everybody who meets these standards and needs investigation is handled by the single office. It's also based in a medical school. Those three together make the OMI unique. And then in 2010, we received, or there was a new facility built. Probably most of you have driven by this building, the New Mexico Scientific Laboratories, and wondered what the heck happened in that building. Well, not just the OMI, the scientific lab itself, plus the veterinary diagnostic services are all in this building. But this is where the new Office of the Medical Investigator is. And by new, I mean 2010. And when that new building was built, the folks in charge of the OMI at the time were really prescient in that they included not just traditional X-ray, which most medical investigators, most medical examiners have, but also magnetic resonance imaging and a CT scanner. We're actually just installed our second CT scanner. The old one, the one that started in 2010, we burned it out. I mean, we cooked that thing. So we just got a brand new one earlier this year that was it was more than $1 million that came from the legislature to pay for that. We were one of the first non-military medical examiners' offices to have CT installed in the office. And there are still there's less than 10 in the country right now. So why is CT such a big deal? Well, it provides imaging quality in a much better way than a traditional X-ray. It actually works on the same basic technology as an X-ray in that it shoots out some X-rays and it has a detector, and then, it takes a picture. The difference is a traditional X-ray takes a picture of your whole body and converts, or the whole thing that's being imaged, converts a 3D object to a 2D image. In CT, the images are taken in very thin slices. Here at the OMI, those slices are a millimeter thick, and they're actually taken with 0.5 millimeter overlap. And so this means that you're not converting a 3D image basically into a 3D reality to a 2D image. And then the computed part, CT stands for computed tomography. The computed part is that once you take one set of images, these slices, you can reconstruct them in different planes. So this is the same set of images. This set is side to side. This is a front to back. This is another side to side. And then you can also use, some recognition of the density of objects to create 3D images and to focus on different components of the body of interest. So the quality of images are such that we have individuals who come here whose the cause of death is unknown. We take a full body CT of them, and we may be able to determine the cause of death without a full autopsy. And that's a really important thing, partly because communities sometimes would like to avoid full autopsies, partly because forensic pathologists are hard to find. There's less than 600 in the whole country, and so there's a shortage of them. And so this allows us to do our work more efficiently. So imaging started at OMI, as I mentioned, in 2010 with the new building. And at the same time, the chief MI at the time and a group of other people received a grant from the National Institute of Justice to test whether CT could supplement or supplant traditional autopsies in a way I was just discussing. First, they looked just at very specific causes of death, gunshot wounds, sharp force trauma, and a few other specific causes. And then they also needed to collect other causes of death, CTs from other causes of death for comparison. During the time of that grant, they collected 6,000 full body images. So they CT scanned 6,000 individuals. And the results of that study were so clear that CT was helpful and could be used to improve autopsies and sometimes, replace autopsies, that the decision was made to, first of all, continue to scan nearly everybody who came in through the building, and to continue to do so every day. So scanning from 2010 to 2017 resulted in more than 15,000 CT scans, whole body CT scans of individuals who came through this office. Now, one limit to all of this is that these scans were created for medical legal investigation. Each one was about that individual. The first group were also used in a research study, but they were only used for that research study. So because of that, there was no plan for the reuse of images. And so there was this treasure trove, this incredible resource unmatched anywhere in the world, but no plans to share it or use it. And so some colleagues and I decided, well, that's dumb, let's fix that, and let's figure out how we might share these images in a way that people could use them anywhere. So in 2016, the National Institute of Justice again provided a grant to develop and share this data set. And from that, we developed the New Mexico Decedent Image Database, as I mentioned before, NIMDID or NMDID. This required getting a bunch of resources and creating a whole bunch of new standards. So one of the first things we did was secure data storage, and we did that at the Center for Advanced Research Computing. And this data set uses about 50 terabytes of space. Additionally, we created standards for what data looked like and vocabulary standards, because one of the things that makes NMDID so useful, yes, it includes 15,000 plus whole body CT scans, but it also includes a lot of information about those individuals. And none of that data, simple things like age and sex, but then also things like what did people do for a living, or what kinds of hobbies did they have, what kind of education did they have, where in the state were they from, were they born in this country, were their grandparents born in this country, all kinds of things like that. There were a few standards for us to draw on. So we created a whole bunch of standards for that. Then we needed a website interface that would be user-friendly, that would be easy to search, provide the information quickly, but also protect privacy. And then we also needed to gather all of this information from everybody. So what I'm talking about here is metadata, and metadata has this dumb definition. It's data about data. And so the data here, the first data, is the CT scans. All right, at its core, CT scans are a bunch of zeros and ones, just like every other bit of computer data. But so the CT scan is the data. But to make them truly useful, we needed to know a lot about them. So we needed metadata about those CT scans. And those are things like when someone was born, and what did they die of, and darn, how many kids did they have, and anything we could think of. So we actually did a project. One of a former PhD student in anthropology, of somebody who graduated with their PhD in anthropology, then went on and got a master's in clinical research from the biomedical informatics program. And for that, she queried researchers all over the country in a variety of different fields and asked them, hey, what do you need to know? What's the minimum thing you need to know to make these CT scans useful? And we came up with about 57 different pieces of data that everyone wanted. And then we set about collecting those 57 pieces of data, and we got those data from two different places. One was the actual OMI database that it comes from investigations, and that needed a lot of standardization. Medical legal investigation is not very standardized, and this makes sense because you wouldn't ask the same questions of a family of someone who died at 50 as you might 90 or 25, or somebody who, there's a lot of different circumstances under which people die that make it hard to standardize the questions you would ask. And then the other thing we did was that we called family members for remaining information, stuff that would never be in investigations, but might be important. Things like how many kids somebody had, or what were their hobbies that might affect things about their body. So we actually called next of kin. There are 15,242 individuals in this database. We attempted to call about 10,000 families before we ran out of money, basically money and time. Out of those 10,000, we made contact with about 5,000, which was a rate higher than I expected, and asked them, hey, will you answer our survey? And we called them on the phone. So think about how you act when somebody calls you on the phone and asks a question. I usually hang up on them, but 2,072 different people, different next of kin, provided information about their family members who were deceased. I find that amazing and a huge indicator of the commitment to research that families in New Mexico were open to making. How many people participated varied by group. Among American Indians, more than about 15.5% that we contacted provided information. Among Hispanic Latinx Americans, it was more like 23.5%. And it was very similar for non-Hispanic whites, about 24%. So that's a better return than almost any survey ever gets. So what kind of data did we collect? So some of these things I've mentioned, just simple things like sex, but also, birth year and death year. Where was this individual born? Where were their parents born or their grandparents born? What was their health history? Things like, did they ever have cancer, or did their family ever have, anybody in their family ever have cancer? If so, what kind? What other kinds of medical diagnoses did they have? What did they do for a living? Did that involve strenuous level? How was their socioeconomic status as a child, and what was it like as an adult? And then we also, from the investigations, were able to get a lot of information about the circumstances of death. So this body of information is incredible. We don't have it for all 15,000 people, but we have some for everybody. So one whole body CT scan, which is not a thing anybody ever gets in their lifetime because it's a lot of radiation, it consists of about 10,000 2D images, which can be displayed either individually as 2D images or reconstructed into 3D renderings. I'll show you a couple of those. Each one totals about 7 gigabytes of data. So we're talking about a lot of data here. We provide researchers with 2 sets of images, one that's optimized for soft tissue and the other for bone. And they also get things called scouts, which you can see here. And this is kind of like a computed whole body X-ray. And it allows people to look at this real fast and say, oh, it turns out this body won't work for me, or it will work for me. So when they're making decisions about what CTs to request, they can use the scouts for that. Importantly, all the images are completely de-identified and anonymized. So there's the number, the NMDID number, is not trackable back to the individual's name. Included in NMD are, here's some basic demographics, age groups. The single largest group are middle adults, 31 to 55 years, but of course, older adults is close by that. And then the race and ethnicity information to some extent mirrors the state. I personally think that we make some errors here at the OMI, and I actually think this is common around the country, that there's errors made in this, the way this information is collected. And it's one of my goals for the future is to improve this data. Some additional statistics about more than 1/3 of the individuals died of natural causes. I think we get this image, okay, somebody needed an autopsy because there was a crime committed, but in fact, that's not true. 1/3 of them were natural deaths, almost 40% were accidents. So all in all, the decedents account for approximately 11% of the deaths in New Mexico in 2010 and 2017. And when I first calculated this, it blew me away, because to get a sample like that is, I want to say rare, but that's an understatement. So what can you do with this? Well, metadata alone is valuable for studies of health disparities and economic inequality and a lot of other things. I'm working on a project right now with people where we're not even using the CTs. We're just using the metadata to hopefully come up with some information that can help New Mexicans. When you add in those CTs, there's no other comparable resource for research in the world. And then, so this is another thing you can do is you can extract 3D images of parts of the body and study them alone. So this is a skull of an individual who's in the collection. And once we have this, it's true to life, meaning that we can take measurements of it. We can examine the shape, the size, and a lot of other features and compare that with other individuals to get, to make a research study. It's not just bones. This is one of my favorite images. I didn't make this one. It comes from a researcher at the University of North Texas. And what we're looking at here is air spaces. So this is empty spots in your body, basically. These are lungs, the trachea, the space in the mouth, all the nasal cavities, and those little spots in the back, those are mastoid sinuses. And so that's what we're looking here at is sinuses and airways. So you can extract any component. We could do the same thing with a liver or a kidney or anything like that. This is who's using NMDID at the moment. Actually, this is a little bit earlier. This is May 2021. At that point, we had 491 users, about half of which are from the US and the rest are worldwide. We're up over 670 users right now, and it continues to be about half US, half other countries. There are users on 6 continents. And then there's a 2-step process to use the database. One, you can get metadata, and the second one, you can get CTs. So improved image requests, back in May, we were at about 166. I think we're at, I can't believe it, but I think it's like 270 right now. It's kind of crazy. And we're at about 40 countries. So I know this is the biggest thing. This is the most impact my research will ever have. You know, there's not another thing I'm going to do that's as important as NMDID, which kind of makes me sad, to tell the truth. A few ethical considerations I want to mention. This is a little hard for people, and it's kind of surprising to me, but this is the truth: is that in New Mexico, the Attorney General of our state has determined that decedents are not considered human subjects. They're not human anymore. And that's a legal determination. It's not an ethical or moral determination. It's a legal determination. What this means outside of NMDID is that all the data that's kept by the Office of the Medical Investigator is discoverable through a Freedom of Information request. We developed a research protocol for the UNM IRB for the research that we were doing, specifically related to calling up next of kin and asking them questions about their family members. However, the IRB also determined that next of kin are not the subjects of the research, which they're not. We're asking them questions, but the subject of research is the decedent. And so the UNM IRB determined that no human subjects research approval was required to develop the database. Despite that, the development of the protocol of the project followed our specific research protocol anyway, in order to protect decedent's privacy, protect next of kin privacy. And there are data use agreement for users that places limitations on the way they use the data to protect people. During the time that we were calling next of kin, all the people that we called were informed that their participation was voluntary, that they could answer some or all or no questions, whatever they wanted. They were provided my name and contact information. They also were offered grief counseling and provided contact information, and they were told that they could opt out of participation. We actually had undergraduates making these calls, and they were also offered grief counseling for their experiences. Many people chose not to answer some or all questions, just like in any survey. Approximately 30 people contacted me. Mostly they were asking whether this was a scam. You know, they were concerned that this was really a UNM thing. One person out of the 10,000 we contacted requested their family members' information be removed from the database, which of course we did. Now, briefly, I have no idea where I am in time because I don't have a clock anywhere in front of me, so hopefully I'm not running too long. I want to talk about an application of this project specifically for New Mexico. As I mentioned, there's 670 people around the world using this, but what's happening here? There are other researchers using NMDID for New Mexican projects, but I'm just going to talk about one I'm doing because that's how I do it. Okay, so we're working to improve identification of unknown American Indian and Hispanic Latinx decedents. The crisis of the missing is a multifactorial problem, and it's a huge problem, and it's gotten a lot of attention lately, which makes me very happy. Some of the problems that cause the crisis of the missing relate to poverty and violence and addiction and rural life, but there are other causes as well. One example of why this is a crisis. So at the Office of the Medical Investigator, American Indians are 2 times more likely to have an undetermined cause of death than non-Hispanic whites. What this means is that after a death investigation, we can't figure out what killed somebody. And why would that be? Well, often it's because their body has been undiscovered for an extended period of time and then discovered and evidence is missing. Additionally, at the national level, there are 2/3 less unknown remains than expected for American Indians. What this means is you've got people who are reporting missing people and people who are finding skeletons and are reporting what we think they are. And there should be an approximate match between the number of people who are reported as missing and the number of remains that are found. And if it's not the same numerical match, percentage-wise, it should be the same. But in fact, many more individuals are reported missing, many more American Indians are reported missing than are found. And one reason for this is likely, there we go. Errors in the forensic anthropological estimation of who they are. So the research that we're proposing right now addresses this component. We hope to improve our ability to figure out who someone is. So the biological profile is something that forensic anthropologists are tasked with, and the purpose is to limit the pool of missing persons for comparison with unknown remains. So we have the universe of unknown people, or excuse me, that's not right. We have the universe of missing persons, all the people who have been reported missing. And then we have a single set of human remains, usually skeletal, and we have to figure out who this one person is compared to that whole pool of missing persons. Now, positive ID, the actual match, usually happens by comparison with dental records or DNA. But to get to the point where you can even call up some dentist and say, hey, do you have dental records for this missing person? You have to have some kind of idea who they are. You can't just compare one set of teeth with all the dental records. So this is the purpose of forensic anthropology, the core purpose of it. The forensic anthropologist is tasked with estimating from just a skeleton the age of the person at their death, whether they were male or female, their population affinity, and I'll come back to that in a second, stature, which is the fancy word that we use for height, and any identifying characteristics that they may have, say a medical implant or kind of weird gaps in their teeth or something like that. So population affinity is our terms for the correlation between biological factors we can see in the skeleton and socially determined groups. This might be the groups that are in the census, or it might be the groups that we recognize in our population among us. So like in New Mexico, we have some groups, some socially determined groups that are not included on the census. So with the research that I'm conducting, we help to improve our estimates of population affinity and also stature, because it turns out that there are no group-specific equations for estimating height for either contemporary Native Americans or Hispanic Latinx populations. So now let me tell you what the current problem with population affinity is. The stature problem is a little easier to solve, so I'm just going to concentrate on the population affinity one. This is a still from the most common program that forensic anthropologists use to estimate population affinity. So all of these squares on the bottom here, all of this, where it says cranium and mandible, these are all measurements that we take on a skull. We can do this virtually in a CT, or we can do it with a set of calipers, and we measure just from point to point. So we take these measurements and then we can compare with known individuals from these populations. These are ones where they're called reference populations. Some forensic anthropologist in the past has already gone and measured a whole bunch of skulls from white males and white females and black males and black females, etc. And then what we do is we take our measurements and we compare them with those reference groups and say, who is this most like, and what is the probability that it belongs to each group? The problem is we're dependent on these reference samples. And if the reference samples are bad, the analysis will be bad. So here's what the help reading, when in the people who made 4DISC, that program I just showed you, was what they say. So about their reference samples. They say that we have 13 population samples that consist of individuals born after 1930, except for many of the American Indians. All right, and then if we look here, so we look at American whites, for example, includes 737 males and 454 females. If we look at American blacks, 224 males and 137 females. If we look at American Indians, we're at 59 males and 32 females, but in fact, that's not even true. There are 15 males and 5 females, mostly from the Southwest, which helps us, and the rest were augmented with samples from prior to the 20th century. Now, there are many good reasons why American Indians are not included in research samples. This has to do with a warranted distrust of science, religious reasons, many reasons why American Indians are not included in these research samples that make sense. But the consequences are that forensic anthropologists have a low chance of properly matching people to their population when the reference samples are so small. So the solution that we propose, and we're in the process of waiting right now to hear about funding about whether we're going to do this research, is to draw from the New Mexico Decedent Image Database. This is the front page of the website for that project, and it includes, among that 15,000, 1,822 American Indians, 255 of which have tribal affinity provided by their next of kin. And so this is our core sample. Even if we only analyze those 255, we would 10 times increase the current reference sample. So that's our goal. And we have a preliminary study that we've done with funding from both Advance and the Department of Pathology at UNM. And so we take these CT scan skulls, and as I mentioned before, you can take measurements from them, so we do. And so we take these kinds of images, we take a ton of measurements from them, probably 50 different measurements, and we compare them to reference samples. And so the image here, the scatter plot here on the left, is comparing American Indians from the New Mexico Decedent Image Database sample and just a small sample of New Mexican Hispanics and Latinos from the same group, with some people that they might get confused with, especially related to migrants to the US. These guys in turquoise, these are our American Indian samples, and these people in this kind of weird greeny color, I hope people can see that, are the Hispanic group. Everybody else are some Mexican migrants that unfortunately passed along the Texas border. I think there might be some from Arizona as well. Guatemalan Mayans in orange, and Yucatan Mayans in dark green. So you can see that the Latino populations, including those from Latin America, are kind of all arrayed on the right, whereas our American Indians are on the left. And that's a good indicator that we're going to be able to place people properly to basically know when somebody's an American Indian. That's the goal here. So we will be able to do that. We are not sure yet. The New Mexican sample of Hispanic Latinos is too small yet so far to know if we're going to be able to differentiate those from other groups. We'll need some more of those before we can know. So that's the work I've been doing. And I think it's depressing and awful. And I hope that I haven't depressed you too much, but also you can see the value that we are bringing to the community here, two important things. Our goal is to alleviate suffering, families suffering, not knowing where their family members are. That's our intent. Helping me with that, I want to bring out, name a few people specifically. So I want to shout out first to some computing resources at Arts and Sciences, especially Eric Reichert and Walter Winiger Valdez, and at UNMIT, I'm just going to say it the way I always do, Ron and Tuan. They are my favorites. And then, of course, at the Center for Advanced Research Computing, this project would not be possible, neither would my sanity, without Patrick Bridges and Hussein Al-Azawi. Some research administrators I'd like to name. I know I'm going to miss somebody, and I apologize right off the bat for missing folks, but folks that I interact with every day include at Anthropology, Jennifer George, our department administrator, and Jonella Vasquez, our accountant. At the Office of the Medical Investigator, Tulu, Anthony Cervantes, and Garen Bodor. Gary's she puts together our statistical research, and she just saves me all the time. If there's a question I have, I go to Gary. In pathology, Deanna Gutierrez, the accountant, Bert, Ruth, and Nancy, thank you so much for welcoming me and treating me just like any other person, even though I'm not a pathologist. At Advanced, Sandy Rodriguez and Kate Cunningham. Kate's really, she's the person who does all the cool advanced videos, so maybe she doesn't really count as a research administrator, but I wanted to say thanks to her anyway. Folks at Contracts and Grants and IRB, I noticed Tim Wester, Jeremy, Ernesto. Thank you guys for all the hard work, putting up with me and my crazy team and the funny things that we do. Haha, they're not so funny. And finally, I want to call especially to the Queen, Grace Faustino at the Office of the Vice President for Research, truly responsible for my sanity, whether she wants to be or not. And then just some final acknowledgements to funders, include Advance, the Department of Pathology, the National Institute of Justice, and then to my students, the Bridge Lab members. This is the logo for our lab. If you're curious about Bridge Lab, you can just search Bridge Lab UNM and learn more about what we do in addition to this forensic work. And thank you all for your time and attention. And if you have questions, I am happy to answer them. And I'm going to stop my screen share so that we can all see each other.
We do have time for a couple questions, so thank you. If you have a question, if you'd please raise your hand, and I'm trying to tell the differences between raised hand and claps. And Heather, thank you very much again for giving this keynote address. I know I found it very interesting, and observing the faces of many of the people who have their cameras on, they also found it very interesting. So thank you again very much for doing so.
My pleasure.
And I think, Shawnee, do you have a question, or were you clapping? I can't, sorry, it's hard to tell the difference.
I was clapping. It was a great presentation. Good to know what work we're helping her do her work by processing, contracts from proposal to award to contracts. So good job. Okay, Dr. Fisher, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. That was so fascinating. I loved it. I'm curious, I'm thinking about the stuff you were presenting at the end about having to identify, people, unknowns, right? The unknowns that are in that. And so if you could, I'm a big fan of the magic wand. So if you could wave a magic wand and have this research done where we had much better handle on being able to identify, what do you think that would do with respect to the impact on, in New Mexico, but around the world in terms of being able to better identify remains?
So I'm going to pretend for a second I have two magic wands, and the
Okay.
first one I actually have some control over. So really, I think what we do is we alleviate suffering because families spend less time not knowing what happened to their loved ones. And we show respect. We treat people equally. You know, this has been an issue in the news just this last couple weeks, where over and over and over, we have white women go missing. And there's all this national publicity about it. And then people come out and say, hey, wait a second, you know, where's this attention for my community? And that's my goal, is to hope to treat people with respect, to alleviate disparities in death. You know, these are not health disparities, these are death disparities. But can I, you know, what can I do to do that? And then the second magic wand that I don't control is the one that I would use so that I don't get these cases in the first place. You know, violence is reduced in every community, and we get a better understanding of health disparities at the same time. So I can't do that. I wish I could, but I can't do that. But I can do this one thing. At least I hope I can.
Thank you.
I think I saw a question in the chat asking me about how many missing persons and cold cases are solved with this data this year. You know, this is a really good question. And I don't know if I have a fantastic answer, because sometimes so you can have a missing person case and a cold case. A cold case isn't usually until until remains have been discovered and investigated for over a year. And here in New Mexico, we have a fantastic record of identifying people within a full year from the moment they're found. Now, I can't be responsible for how long it takes for bodies to be found, but we have an incredible record. I can't say how many we're solving, but what I can say is that we're not solving less than 5 a year. It's amazing. We're really good at it. And we also have a record of solving cases that are 30 years old. Somebody asked this question: how do I account for multi-race and multi-ethnic? You know, this is a fantastic question. The way I approach it, I don't know if this is the way anybody else does, but we allowed family members, next of kin, to identify people in as many ways as they wanted to. Now, again, this is the next of kin. What we asked the next of kin was, how would your family member have identified themselves? And so there might be some error there, but it's probably a lot closer than, you know, other sources of information. And they were allowed to name as many possibilities, or, you know, they could say Native American and Hispanic, they could say Black and Hispanic, they could say Black and Hispanic and Asian, you know, whatever was their choice. So giving as much power as possible to the families.
Okay, thank you again very much, Dr. Edgar. We very much appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to come and deliver the keynote address to our Research Administrator Symposium. And we look very much forward to hopefully you getting your funding and continuing your research and helping the people in New Mexico and around as well.